Out front now, Ellie Honig, our legal analyst and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, former defense attorney and mayor of Baltimore, and Alan Tuerkheimer, a jury consultant. So I appreciate all of you taking the time. So Ellie, let me start with you. The jury is meeting right now. So walk us through the charges they're considering, these three charges, and the penalties if Chauvin is found guilty of any of them, or whether they can be on top of each other. I mean, just lay this out here.
Yeah, Erin, so the jury's considering three separate charges. Each of them stands alone. They will vote separately on each one. The top charge is murder in the second degree. What the prosecution has to show is that Chauvin intentionally assaulted, not necessarily intended to kill, but assaulted George Floyd, resulting in his death. The middle charge is third-degree murder. The prosecution has to show what we call depraved mind murder, meaning that the defendant created an eminently dangerous situation unsafe for human life. And then the lowest charge is manslaughter, and the prosecution there has to prove what we call culpable negligence, meaning Derek Chauvin created an unreasonable risk to George Floyd. Laying over all this is the issue of medical causation. Did Derek Chauvin's actions cause George Floyd's death? The defense actually misstated that today during their closing. They said if other factors were involved, then you have to acquit. That's not correct. The prosecution corrected it. The judge eventually corrected it. As long as Chauvin's actions were one contributing cause, that's enough for the jury to convict.
All right. And just to be clear, Ellie, do they have to pick one of those charges? I mean, they could go on none of them, but they can't go on more than one, correct? You got to pick.
They can convict on all three.
They can
convict on 2, 1, or 0, yes.
Okay. All right. So then when you look at your times here of how much time you could spend in prison, obviously that becomes additive. And I know the judge would eventually set that as well. Mayor Rawlings-Blake, let me ask you then about Chauvin's defense attorney voicing concerns after the jury left the room about whether they've been able to avoid, you guys, you all and everyone else coming on every night and analyzing this and taking this apart night after night. He specifically brought up Congressman Maxine Waters, who said today who said this when asked what protesters should do if Chauvin is found not guilty. Let me play what she said.
We got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
And she explicitly said that he was guilty of murder, she said. Here's what was said in court about her comments.
Now that we have U.S. representatives threatening acts of violence in relation to this specific case, it's mind-boggling to me, Judge.
Well, I'll give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned.
I mean, Mayor, as a mayor and also a former defense attorney, I mean, this is pretty stunning. I mean, the judge in the trial said Maxine Waters may have done something to cause a verdict here to be overturned. It's pretty incredible.
I think if you listen to the judge, he's very careful with his words. So I think he really underscored the seriousness of what was said. And I think everyone understands her background. Everyone understands she comes from a civil rights background. She comes from a protest background. But speaking as someone who has been on the front lines fighting for police reform when no one, when the legislature was really deaf to the concerns that I was raising, we need other elected officials to stand with community members, go to testify, help them understand the process of moving forward with police reform. There are there that want real police reform, that want to rethink policing. And the mayors, I shouldn't say we, those mayors need assistance, not confrontation. They need allies, and they need people to help testify and shape the policy moving forward.
So, Alan, the jury, as I said, is deliberating right now. We know their views about this case may be complicated. I found it was fascinating today to read through everything we knew about them. They had filled out an extensive questionnaire before they were selected to be on the jury. One juror, a black man in his 30s, told the court that he told his wife after Floyd's death, quote, "It could have been me." But then he strongly agreed, again, that was his, check strongly agreed, that police in his community make him feel safe. A black woman in her 60s, also on the jury, said when asked about Black Lives Matter, quote, "I am black and my life matters." But then about Blue Lives Matter, she said, "My family member is a police officer and all lives matter." So when you look through all of these details, Alan, what does this tell you about what's going on in that room right now, likely?
This is a very diligent jury. They're nuanced, and they have a lot of middle-of-the-road tendencies because the ones on the extreme ends, on the margins, were eliminated. So as you said, I think there was also a juror who said he witnessed a police harass somebody, yet at the same time he has friends who are police officers. So when you look at those questionnaires, it indicates one thing and then goes to the other. So this is a very diverse jury, and jurors see things through many different attributes: race, gender, their experiences, their occupations. And the jury is much more diverse than Hennepin County is. And this bodes well for a very rich deliberation. I've seen observationally, and the literature is replete with evidence that the more diverse a jury is, the more viewpoints they consider in deliberations, the more accurate their recall is of evidence, and they tend to approach deliberations with much more rigor and determination. So it'll be a fascinating deliberation as they set to go over the evidence and all the testimony.
It's really interesting, all those points you make, and especially as you call them nuanced and diligent. I mean, Ellie, 8 of the 12 jurors told the court during jury selection that police in their community do make them feel safe. Now, prosecutors today tried to appeal to those jurors, and here's how they did it.
Defendant was a police officer. He was. And again, you need to set aside the notion that it's impossible for a police officer to do something like this. This is not an anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution.
Ellie, I mean, obviously directly going at that, right? That you're not going against police if you find him guilty. That's the point they're making, right? You're actually helping all the good police out there, argument he's making. Do you think that was effective?
Very effective. Your goal as the prosecutor here is not to vilify all police. In fact, that would be counterproductive given this jury, the things they said in their questionnaires, and given probably any jury. All you need to do is explain to this jury why Derek Chauvin, not every cop ever, Derek Chauvin, why he committed a crime on May 25th, 2020. And I think it was a very effective tactic in focusing the jury's attention and taking some of the political sort of air out of this for the defense side. And as Alan said, this jury has been selected by the parties. And as a result, the jurors are going to have something that each side likes. Both sides, by the way, left some of their peremptory strikes, the ability to get rid of certain jurors, unused. So that tells me both sides are satisfied here.
Yeah, which is, I thought was actually fascinating when I saw that, right? You're trying this, you know, obviously right where this occurred. And both of them left, you know, the ability to cut jurors on the table. So that was fascinating. So, Alan, you know, some of the jurors actually have jobs that directly weigh on the case. So when we talk about all this expert testimony that we have gone through night after night, one of them's a nurse who works with patient ventilation and cardiac care. Another has a background in psychology. You know, how do you think that is going to impact deliberations? You know, it was a pretty impressive group of people with some really, you know, impressive careers, as I read their descriptions.
Absolutely. It's a very accomplished set of jurors on this case. The nurse, the healthcare advocate, there's a chemist. They'll probably be residential experts on the jury, and the jurors will look to them for guidance on some of the medical testimony. So it really affects how the case will flow in the deliberations. There was a social worker that said she's trained to respect everyone. She'll probably try to build consensus, seek out viewpoints in the deliberation, make sure everybody is heard. And there's a banker, maybe the banker is more analytical and likes to go through all the details of nature. So it's fascinating how these occupations are going to influence how the deliberation will unfold.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, too, because I know I've heard some people say, oh, well, you know, by definition, they ask people in the jury, Alan, you know, if they haven't really been following this, then we'll consider you as someone to be on the jury. And they view that as a negative, that these people would be just so uninterested in the world. How could you have missed George Floyd? I didn't see it that way when I looked at it. I actually saw that most of them had quite a bit of knowledge. You know, they seemed very nuanced, to your point. Mayor Rawlings-Blake, but when this verdict comes out, major cities are prepared for unrest, right? We've got National Guard in Washington, and across this country, cities are extremely concerned. You experienced this firsthand as mayor of Baltimore when Freddie Gray died in police custody. So President Biden says this was already a tinderbox. It becomes more volatile by the day. How worried are you about what we might see?
I'm concerned because there's just no way to predict how people will respond. I mean, there can be, if there could be protests and things can get out of control if it is a guilty verdict, or if it's a not guilty verdict. I mean, there's no way to tell. I think what we need to focus on is the way forward. There are cities across the country who are actively working with the community to rethink what policing looks like. More people need to be a part of that process to change, constructively change, and work with public servants who have given, who have used their lives to make our communities better. We can do better together if we are willing to do the work.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.